Hey guys, tonight we're going to step back, way back, over 1,000 years, to a time when the world was a much wilder, more mysterious place. Tonight, you're not just a listener. You are a Viking. You stand at the very edge of the known world, the biting wind whipping your hair, the scent of salt and ancient wood filling your lungs. Before you, a longship, sleek and formidable, bobs impatiently on the dark, restless waters of a Norwegian fjord, ready to carry you across the unforgiving North Sea. You're about to embark on a journey that will challenge every fiber of your being, a voyage where the odds of reaching your destination are, shall we say, less than ideal. In fact, you probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The fan hums, a gentle whisper in the quiet of your room. But here, in the cold, pre-dawn gloom of a Viking Age harbor, the wind howls a different tune. It sings of distant lands, of icy spray, and of the immense, untamed power of the ocean. You pull your wool cloak tighter, the coarse fabric scratching against your neck, a small comfort against the chill that seeps into your bones. The air smells of pine tar, cured fish, and the damp earth of the fjordside village you call home. Around you, the murmur of your fellow crewmen, their voices low and serious, blends with the rhythmic lapping of waves against the hull of your Nar, or perhaps a more slender curve, a versatile ship designed for both coastal trade and longer voyages. You've prepared for weeks, gathering provisions, checking your gear, saying your farewells. Each goodbye felt heavy, weighted with the unspoken possibility that this might be the last. You trudge through the mud and pebbles on the shore, your heavy boots sinking slightly with each step. The ship, a magnificent beast of timber and rope, seems to breathe with the tide, its mast a skeletal finger pointing towards the gray, bruised sky. This isn't just a vessel. It's your entire world for the foreseeable future, a fragile wooden shell separating you from an abyss of cold, dark water. Forget your modern comforts. There's no satellite navigation here, no instant weather forecasts, and certainly no in-flight entertainment system. Your only company will be the creak of the timbers, the roar of the wind, and the occasional, deeply unsettling groan of the sea itself. If you're lucky, you might even get to experience the joy of chronic seasickness for weeks on end. Ah, the good old days. As you step onto the gangplank, the planks groaning under your weight, you feel the familiar sway of the ship. This is it. This is the moment you commit. You've heard the tales, of course, from grizzled old sailors with eyes as deep and troubled as the ocean itself. Tales of storms that swallowed ships whole, of monstrous waves that could splinter even the mightiest timbers, a fog so thick you couldn't see the prow of your own vessel. It's a gamble every time, but the lure of what lies beyond, the promise of new lands, new riches, or simply the desperate need for more farming land, pulls you forward. The North Sea, your immediate challenge, is not merely a body of water. It's a living, breathing, unpredictable entity. It can be a glassy, reflective surface one moment, mirroring the vastness of the heavens, and a raging, churning maelstrom the next, spitting foam and fury. Its depths hold secrets and dangers beyond imagining, from hidden reefs to the sheer, crushing weight of the water itself. For the Vikings, the sea was both highway and adversary, a source of life and a constant threat of death. You are about to pit your strength, your skill, and the very integrity of your ship against its formidable power. Think about it. You're essentially getting into a glorified wooden bathtub and hoping for the best. No, really, these early ships, while incredibly advanced for their time, were still at the mercy of the elements. The very material they were made from, wood, was porous, absorbent, and prone to swelling, shrinking, and eventually rotting. It's a bit like trying to keep water out of a sieve, only your sieve is made of thousands of planks and rivets, and it's constantly being pounded by liquid hammers. The sea, with its relentless embrace, seeks to reclaim everything that dares to float upon its surface. It's a persistent, saline assailant, always looking for the tiniest crack, the most minute weakness, to exploit. Historically, the Viking longships, like the famous Oseberg ship, were marvels of engineering. They were clinker-built, meaning their planks overlapped like scales, fastened together with iron rivets. This construction gave them incredible flexibility, allowing them to ride over waves rather than cut through them, making them surprisingly seaworthy in rough conditions. But even with such ingenious designs, the fundamental problem remained. Wood and water are not natural allies when you're trying to stay afloat for weeks on end. You can almost hear the soft, insidious drip, drip, drip already. Can't you? Your ship, a testament to generations of shipbuilding knowledge, feels alive beneath your feet. You can feel the vibrations of the waves, the subtle shifts as the crew prepares to cast off. The air grows colder as you push away from the shore, the familiar landmarks of your village shrinking with surprising speed. You are truly at the edge of the known world, venturing into waters where maps are non-existent and knowledge is passed down through generations of oral tradition, often embellished with tales of sea monsters and vengeful gods. It's certainly more exciting than navigating with Google Maps, though arguably less convenient for finding the nearest gas station. The journey itself is a test of endurance, not just for the ship, but for every soul aboard. Sleep comes in fitful snatches, disturbed by the rhythmic creak of the hull and the constant spray. Food is simple and often monotonous: dried meat, hardtack, fermented milk. There's no complaining, though. Everyone understands the stakes. Every individual on this ship is a vital cog in the machine, from the oarsman to the lookout perched precariously in the mast. The collective spirit, the sheer force of will to survive and succeed, is as crucial as the strength of the timbers beneath you. And it's not just the visible elements you contend with. The Viking worldview was steeped in belief in unseen forces. A quirky tidbit: some historians suggest that the elaborate dragon heads carved on the prows of their longships weren't just for intimidation in battle. When approaching friendly shores, these heads would often be removed or turned inwards, so as not to frighten away the land spirits of their own people. Imagine, you've just battled a fierce storm, you're exhausted, and now you're carefully turning a wooden dragon head around so you don't accidentally offend a tree sprite. Practicality and superstition often went hand in hand. The sheer vastness of the North Sea stretches before you, a boundless expanse of gray-green that merges seamlessly with the equally gray sky. You scan the horizon, looking for any sign of change, any hint of what the day will bring. The sun, when it eventually peeks through the clouds, is a pale, indifferent disk, offering little warmth. You feel small, insignificant, yet also part of something grand, something epic. This isn't just a trip, it's an act of defiance against the natural order, a declaration that humanity can conquer even the most formidable barriers. Historians still debate the primary motivations behind the initial Viking expansion, whether it was purely economic, a result of overpopulation in their homelands, or driven by a thirst for adventure and glory. Perhaps it was all of these things, a complex tapestry of necessity and ambition woven together with the threads of sheer audacity. What is clear, however, is that without a reliable way to make these voyages, without ships that could withstand the brutal conditions, none of it would have been possible. The very act of sailing into the unknown required an immense amount of trust in your vessel and the ingenuity that went into its construction. You feel the ship pick up speed as the oarsmen find their rhythm, their powerful strokes propelling you further from the safety of the fjord. The spray begins to fly, a fine, cold mist that coats your face and eyelashes. You taste the salt on your lips, feel the bite of the wind through your clothes. This is the North Sea, in all its raw, majestic, and terrifying glory. And you, a Viking, are its newest, most vulnerable passenger. The challenge has truly begun. You stand there, dear listener, on the threshold of a grand adventure, a journey across the vast, often tempestuous waters that separate one world from another. But before you can even dream of distant shores and new horizons, you must first contend with the most fundamental, most insidious challenge of all: the relentless, insatiable thirst of the timber beneath your feet. Imagine, if you will, that you've just moved into a beautiful old house, full of character, all crafted from the finest wood. It's sturdy, it's proud, but it's also, well, old. Now, picture it not as a house, but as a living, breathing entity, constantly battling the elements. This is your longship, your floating home, a magnificent testament to human ingenuity, yet perpetually locked in a silent, desperate struggle against the very medium that supports it, water. You step aboard, feeling the solid planks beneath your boots, but even as you do, a subtle chill pervades the air. It's not just the crisp sea breeze, it's the dampness that permeates everything. Wood, you see, is not like stone or metal. It's organic, porous, full of tiny, microscopic capillaries, like a bundle of straws. It breathes. It expands when it's wet, drawing in moisture, and contracts when it dries, letting it go. And this constant expansion and contraction, this dance with the elements, is the very heart of the problem. Think of it like trying to keep water in a colander, or perhaps a sieve if you're feeling particularly optimistic. You can try your best, but those tiny gaps, those invisible pathways, they're always there, waiting. Even the most perfectly fitted planks, hewn with skill and precision, are only almost watertight. They are, in essence, a collection of individual pieces, joined together, not a single seamless shell. And where there are joins, there are potential pathways for water. Listen closely. Can you hear it? That faint, rhythmic drip, drip, drip somewhere below deck? Or perhaps a more insistent slosh as a wave nudges the hull. It's the sound of the sea making itself at home, a most unwelcome guest. It seeps in through the seams where one plank overlaps another in the ship's elegant lapstrake construction. It finds its way around the sturdy wooden treenails, those clever wooden pegs that hold the planks together, which, while strong, are not entirely impervious. It whispers through the tiny cracks that develop over time, the stress fractures from countless journeys across choppy waters. Even the knots in the wood, stubborn remnants of branches, can become weak points, allowing a persistent trickle to find its way through. It's a constant, nagging presence. You might be trying to sleep, nestled in your furs, and suddenly a cold, wet patch appears on your blanket. Or you reach for your dried fish, only to find it slightly soggy. The air itself feels heavy with moisture, clinging to your clothes, seeping into your very bones. It's not just an inconvenience, it's a threat. Every drop that enters the hull adds weight, slowly, inexorably. Imagine filling a bathtub one drip at a time. It seems insignificant at first, but given enough time, that tub will be full. On a long voyage, especially one that could last weeks or even months, those drips and trickles accumulate into a significant body of water. This added weight makes the ship sit lower in the water, making it less buoyant, more sluggish, and more susceptible to being swamped by larger waves. It's like trying to run a marathon with increasingly heavy ankle weights. Eventually, you just can't keep going. And it's not just about the weight. The constant dampness is a breeding ground for rot, that silent, insidious enemy of wood. You've probably seen it in an old garden shed, or maybe a forgotten wooden fence post, that soft, crumbly decay, the dark discoloration. On a ship, this isn't just unsightly, it's catastrophic. It weakens the very structure, turning strong, resilient timbers into spongy, unreliable material. A plank that might once have withstood the force of a crashing wave could, after prolonged exposure to moisture and rot, simply splinter and give way. This is why, even today, marine architects and restorers are obsessed with keeping wooden vessels dry, as the integrity of the wood is paramount. It's a mainstream historical fact that the longevity of any wooden ship, from Viking longship to 18th century man of war, was directly tied to how well its timbers resisted water ingress and subsequent decay. You'd think the sea itself would be the main concern, the waves crashing over the bow, the spray stinging your face. But often, the more pressing issue is the water that slips under the radar, slowly filling the bilge. It requires constant vigilance. Someone, or often several someones, must be on bailing duty, scooping out the accumulated water, day and night, in shifts. It's backbreaking, repetitive work, a Sisyphean task that never truly ends. Just when you think you've cleared it all out, another wave crashes, another seam whispers, and the cycle begins anew. It's a bit like having a perpetually running tap in your kitchen sink that you can only ever empty with a teacup. Exhausting, right? The historical records, sparse as they are from this period, often hint at the sheer physical toll of keeping a ship afloat. Crew members weren't just sailors. They were also part-time, full-time bilge pumpers. Imagine trying to sleep, trying to eat, trying to navigate, all while knowing that beneath you, the sea is slowly, patiently trying to reclaim its territory. It's a constant psychological burden as much as a physical one. And then there's the unique challenge posed by the wood itself. While oak, a favored timber for Viking ships, is incredibly strong and durable, it's not immune. When it dries out, say during a long period in port or if the ship is hauled ashore for the winter, the wood shrinks. This shrinkage opens up the very seams that had swollen shut with the constant moisture of the sea, creating new pathways for water once the ship is relaunched. Historians still debate whether Viking shipbuilders intentionally designed their ships with a certain amount of give or flexibility, allowing the planks to move and flex with the waves, or if they were always striving for absolute rigidity and watertightness that was simply impossible to achieve with the materials and techniques available. This constant swelling and shrinking was a quirky tidbit of shipbuilding that kept the mariners on their toes, forcing them into a cycle of maintenance. So, you see, the battle isn't just against the storm or the ice or the unseen shoals. The most intimate, persistent battle is against the very nature of wood itself, against the relentless ingress of seawater, drip by relentless drip. It's a fight for survival, a struggle for comfort, and ultimately, a quest for the very integrity of your vessel. Without a solution to this fundamental problem, long voyages would be impossible, and the very concept of Viking exploration and expansion would remain but a distant dream. You stand there, feeling the phantom spray on your face, the salt on your lips, and a shiver running down your spine that has nothing to do with the bracing North Sea air and everything to do with what's coming next. But before we get to the ingenious solution, let's take a little detour, shall we? A quick glance back at the good old days, or as I like to call them, the sticky, leaky old days. Because, you see, the Vikings weren't the first to grapple with the age-old problem of how to keep the ocean outside the boat. Oh no, humanity, in its endless quest to float rather than sink, had been at this for a very, very long time. You've probably imagined it, haven't you? Early mariners, squinting at their wooden vessels, watching with dismay as tiny rivulets of water snaked through the seams, pooling at the bottom of the hull. It's a bit like trying to stop a sieve from sieving, isn't it? Annoying, persistently damp, and frankly a little disheartening. Their first, most obvious thought, bless their hearts, was to plug the holes. And what did they have readily available? Well, if you lived near a forest, particularly one with lots of pine trees, you had a natural, sticky, dark, and wonderfully aromatic resource at your fingertips. Pitch, often derived from pine tar. Imagine the scene: you're a shipwright centuries ago, perhaps working on a sturdy Greek trireme or an early Roman merchant vessel. The air is thick with the scent of wood smoke and a pungent, almost sweet, aroma. That's the smell of pine tar being produced. It's a fascinating, if somewhat laborious, process. You'd build a special kiln, a sort of inverted cone, often dug into the ground, and pile it high with pine wood, letting it smolder slowly. The heat would coax the resin from the wood, which would then drip down, collecting in a channel at the bottom. This dark, viscous liquid, often called liquid gold by those who relied on it, was your primary weapon against the sea's relentless embrace. It was the ancient world's duct tape, sealant, and general all-purpose sticky stuff rolled into one. And let me tell you, once you got it on your hands, you pretty much kept it on your hands. Forever. Think of it as a permanent, organic, slightly pine-scented glove. Good luck explaining that to your significant other. Once collected, this pitch, sometimes mixed with various waxes or other natural resins for different properties, would be heated to make it more pliable, almost liquid. Then, with brushes, rags, or even bare hands if you were brave or perhaps just resigned to the stickiness, you'd slather it onto the ship's planks, coating the hull, and meticulously working it into every seam and crack. The idea was simple: create an impermeable barrier, a kind of ancient shrink wrap for your ship. And it did work to a degree, for a while, on a good day. But here's where the limited efficacy part comes in, and oh, was it ever limited. You see, wood is a living thing even when it's been cut and shaped into a ship. It breathes. It expands when it's wet, contracts when it's dry. It swells with heat, shrinks with cold. And pitch? Well, pitch is not so flexible. It's a bit like trying to put a rigid plaster cast on a body that keeps doing yoga. As the ship moved, twisted, and groaned under the stress of waves and weather, that beautiful, dark, sticky coating began to crack. Tiny hairline fractures would appear, then larger fissures, like an old road surface after a particularly harsh winter. And what happens when a sealant cracks? Water gets in. Surprise. Imagine the frustration. You've spent days, weeks even, slathering this stuff on, inhaling the fumes until your brain felt pleasantly fuzzy, feeling like you're finally winning the battle. Then you hit a patch of cold water or a sudden storm, and creak, crack, drip, drip, drip. The very material meant to protect your ship would become brittle in the biting cold of northern waters, or soften and run like a sad, black tear in the baking sun of a Mediterranean summer. It was a constant Sisyphean struggle. You'd bail, you'd patch, you'd curse, and then you'd do it all over again. Bailing, by the way, was practically a full-time job on some of these early vessels. Forget your 9 to 5. This was your dawn to dusk and then some gig. Beyond just the temperature woes, there was the sheer wear and tear. The relentless friction of waves against the hull, the abrasion from sand and debris, the constant flexing of the timbers, all of it conspired to strip away the pitch, leaving the raw wood exposed once more. It was a temporary fix, a band-aid on a gushing wound. And while mainstream historical fact confirms that pine tar was indeed a ubiquitous material, used by shipbuilders from the ancient Egyptians and Phoenicians to the Romans and beyond, its limitations were a universal headache. Historians still argue whether the perceived effectiveness of pitch was due to genuine waterproofing or simply the sheer volume applied and the constant reapplication cycles. Was it a miracle cure or just persistent effort? A scholarly debate for another sleepy night, perhaps. Other natural resins were tried too, of course. Some derived from other trees, some perhaps from mixtures of plant saps and even beeswax. Each had its own quirks. Some were stickier, some less prone to cracking, but none offered the truly enduring, flexible seal that a wooden vessel needed for long, arduous voyages. They were all variations on a theme of mostly works, sometimes, if you're lucky, and constantly reapply. It's like trying to seal a leaky garden hose with chewing gum. It might slow the drip, but it's never going to be truly watertight, is it? You can almost feel the dampness pervading the ship, the lingering smell of mildew mixing with the sharp tang of pitch, the constant, low hum of the bilge pump, or the rhythmic splash of someone bailing by hand. It wasn't just uncomfortable. It was dangerous. Waterlogged wood loses buoyancy, becomes heavier, and makes the ship more sluggish and vulnerable to storms. It also promotes rot, weakening the very structure of the vessel over time. It was a losing battle, a stopgap measure, and certainly not the kind of reliable solution that would allow for truly epic journeys across vast, open oceans. And here's a quirky tidbit for you. Pitch wasn't just for boats. This versatile goo was also used in ancient times for everything from sealing wine amphorae to preserving mummies in Egypt. It was even used as a kind of ancient adhesive for broken pottery or tools. So, while it was a general-purpose wonder substance for many things, its application to dynamic, constantly moving wooden ships proved to be its Achilles heel. It was great for keeping a wine jar sealed, less so for a Viking longship battling an Atlantic gale. So, as you stand there, imagining the disappointment etched on the faces of those ancient mariners, you can almost hear them sighing, dreaming of a better way. A way to truly keep the water out, not just temporarily slow its inevitable creep. They knew, intuitively, that there had to be something more, something that could flex with the wood, that wouldn't crack in the cold or melt in the sun, something that offered more than just a fleeting moment of dryness. They were looking for a game changer, and, as we'll soon discover, they found it in a most unexpected and delightfully greasy place. You stand, perhaps, on the cold, damp shore of a fjord, the air biting at your exposed skin, carrying the scent of salt and damp earth. The waves, relentless and unforgiving, crash against the hull of your longship, a magnificent beast of timber and craftsmanship. But even the most masterful construction, you've learned, is a constant battle against the relentless ingress of seawater. You've seen, firsthand, the limitations of the ancient sealing methods, haven't you? The sticky, dark pitch, laboriously applied, and the various natural resins, scraped from trees and painstakingly boiled, offered a certain measure of protection. Yes, they filled the larger cracks, creating a rudimentary barrier against the hungry ocean. But they were brittle, prone to cracking in the cold, and ultimately, they were no match for the subtle, persistent work of water finding every microscopic pathway into the ship's belly. Imagine the constant, back-breaking labor of bailing, day in and day out, on a long voyage. It's enough to make you wish for a perpetually dry hammock, isn't it? A ship that constantly takes on water is not just uncomfortable. It's slow, unstable, and dangerously prone to succumbing to the icy depths. The very idea of sailing across the vast open ocean, let alone to lands unknown, with a vessel that felt like a perpetually leaking sieve, must have been a terrifying prospect. It was against this backdrop of persistent dampness and practical frustration that the Vikings, with their characteristic blend of sharp intellect and earthy pragmatism, stumbled upon a truly remarkable waterproofing solution. It wasn't some grand, sudden revelation delivered by Odin in a dream. No. Instead, it was born from the twin parents of keen observation and sheer, undeniable necessity. Think about their daily lives. These weren't people who lived in sterile, climate-controlled environments. They lived with nature, in nature, constantly interacting with animals, their products, and the raw materials of their world. Every part of an animal was utilized, from muscle to bone, from sinew to hide, and crucially, fat. Lots and lots of fat. You see, the Vikings were intimately familiar with animal fats. It was a primary source of energy in their diet, a fuel for their lamps, and a crucial ingredient in various forms of leatherworking and hide preservation. They rendered it for cooking, for warmth, for light during the long, dark winters. Their hands, you can imagine, were frequently coated with a thin, greasy film from handling meat, preparing food, or working with hides. It's like when you've just finished a particularly indulgent meal of fried chicken. You know that slightly slick, water-resistant feeling on your fingers? Now imagine that sensation, but amplified and integrated into every aspect of your existence. Perhaps, one particularly cold and damp morning, a shipbuilder, his hands still slick from a breakfast of fatty mutton, instinctively ran his palm over a newly carved plank, noticing how the morning dew simply beaded and rolled off the greasy patch. Or maybe it was a hunter, treating a fresh animal hide with rendered fat to make it supple and waterproof for clothing, who then idly smeared some excess onto a wooden tool handle, observing how it seemed to repel moisture more effectively than the untreated wood. These weren't isolated incidents. They were countless small, almost imperceptible interactions, repeated over generations, forming a cumulative pool of knowledge. The Vikings were master craftsmen, but they were also master problem solvers. They weren't afraid to experiment, to try things that seemed unconventional if they promised a practical benefit. The mainstream historical fact here is that Viking longships were marvels of engineering, designed for speed and shallow drafts, enabling their unparalleled expansion. But their success wasn't just in the hull shape, it was in their ability to keep those hulls functional in harsh conditions. The need for genuinely watertight vessels wasn't a luxury. It was a matter of survival, of enabling longer voyages, of projecting power across vast distances. If your ship is constantly sinking, your empire isn't going to last very long. Is it? You'd be spending more time bailing than pillaging, which, let's be honest, is not the Viking way. The stumbling upon wasn't a single eureka moment, like a light bulb flashing above a Viking's head. They didn't have light bulbs, obviously, but you get the picture. Instead, it was a gradual, iterative process. They would have noticed how the natural oils in certain woods, like oak, offered some resistance to water, but it wasn't enough. Then came the realization that adding a fatty layer, a protective skin of animal grease, could significantly enhance this natural resistance. Think of it less as an invention and more as an amplification of nature's own waterproofing principles. It's like realizing that while your raincoat is good, a bit of extra wax makes it even better. There's a quirky tidbit here. Some theories suggest that early observations might have come from fishermen. Imagine them pulling in their nets, their hands covered in fish guts and oils, noticing how the wooden parts of their boats or fishing gear that were frequently in contact with these animal residues seemed to resist rot and water absorption better than other parts. It's not glamorous, but often the most profound discoveries come from the messiest, most practical corners of life. Historians still argue whether this discovery was a flash of genius by an individual shipbuilder or a collective evolution of knowledge passed down through generations of maritime folk, each adding a small piece to the puzzle. My money's on the latter. Communal knowledge often trumps solitary brilliance in such practical matters. The necessity was the constant companion. Every time a ship had to turn back due to excessive leakage, every time a cargo was ruined by saltwater, every time a crew member developed frostbite from perpetually wet feet, these were powerful motivators. They needed something that was flexible, something that wouldn't crack like pitch in the freezing North Sea, something that could withstand the constant flexing and twisting of a wooden hull battling monstrous waves. And what do you know? Animal fat, in its pure, rendered form, possessed just these properties. It was pliable, it repelled water, and it was readily available from the very livestock they depended upon for food and other resources. It was, in essence, a natural, biodegradable, and remarkably effective sealant, waiting to be properly understood and utilized. The solution was literally under their noses, or rather, on their hands, for centuries. They just needed that moment of focused observation, that spark of ingenuity, to bridge the gap between "this feels greasy" and "this could save my ship." And save their ships it did. You find yourself transported, not just to the edge of the world, but to the heart of a Viking homestead, where the air hums with the lowing of cattle and the grunting of pigs. Your nose, by the way, has probably already picked up on the distinct, earthy aroma of a working farm, a far cry from your scented candles. I'm sure. This is where the story of our ship's waterproofing truly begins, with the very beasts that shared the land with the Vikings, or, in some cases, the very creatures that swam the icy waters they sought to conquer. Imagine, if you will, the domestic scene. The most immediate and readily available sources of fat for any land-based Viking community would have been their livestock. You see the sturdy cattle, their breath steaming in the crisp Nordic air, placidly chewing their cud. These aren't your sleek, modern dairy cows. These are hardy, resilient breeds, built to withstand harsh winters and provide multiple resources. Their fat, known as tallow, would have been a cornerstone of the Viking economy, not just for ships, but for candles, soap, and even cooking. When the time came for a beast to be slaughtered, typically in the autumn, before the lean winter months set in, every single part was utilized. And I mean every single part. Nothing went to waste, a concept that frankly puts our modern, disposable society to shame. You'd see the fat carefully separated, ready for rendering, a process we'll delve into later. It's a bit like getting every last drop out of that toothpaste tube, but on a much grander and smellier scale. Then there are the pigs, rooting around in the muck, oinking contentedly. These intelligent, often maligned animals were another fantastic source of fat, specifically lard. Pigs, being omnivores, were relatively easy to keep and fatten up, converting scraps and whatever they foraged into a rich, pliable fat. Picture them snuffling through the leaf litter, perhaps even getting into a bit of mischief with a stray chicken or two. Their lard, while perhaps not as abundant per animal as tallow from a large ox, was often softer and more easily worked, making it a valuable addition to the waterproofing arsenal. Plus, let's be honest, who doesn't love a bit of bacon? Though, in this context, we're talking about the fat from the bacon, not the crispy goodness itself. Sorry to burst your bubble there. Sheep, too, though perhaps less celebrated for their fat than cattle or pigs, contributed to the overall supply. While their primary value lay in their wool and meat, the fat rendered from sheep, also a type of tallow, would have been collected and utilized. You might see a shepherd, bundled against the wind, guiding his flock across a grassy hillside, each animal a small, walking, woolly factory of resources. It's a testament to the Vikings' ingenuity that they literally squeezed every last drop of usefulness out of their environment. They truly understood the concept of reduce, reuse, recycle long before it became a trendy bumper sticker. But the Viking world wasn't just about land animals. Oh no, far from it. For those communities nestled along the vast, jagged coastlines or venturing into the colder, more remote regions, the sea itself offered an even more potent source of ship-sealing magic, blubber. Imagine the raw power of the ocean and the creatures that inhabit it. Seals, sleek and graceful in the water, clumsy but endearing on land, were a crucial resource. You might witness a hunting party, expertly maneuvering their small boats, or stalking seals on an isolated ice floe. The blubber from seals, a thick layer of fat beneath their skin, was exceptionally rich in oils and resistant to cold, making it an ideal candidate for waterproofing in frigid conditions. It wasn't just about the fat, of course. The meat provided sustenance, and their hides were invaluable for clothing, ropes, and even boat coverings. It's a full-service animal, really. And then we come to the leviathans of the deep, whales. For certain Viking communities, particularly those venturing into the North Atlantic, whaling was a significant, albeit perilous, undertaking. Picture the sheer scale of such an operation. The specialized harpoons, the coordinated efforts of multiple longships, the immense strength required to bring down such a colossal beast. The sheer volume of blubber from a single whale could provide enough waterproofing material for an entire fleet, not to mention the vast quantities of meat and whalebone. Historians still argue whether large-scale commercial whaling was as common in the early Viking Age as it became later, or if it was primarily opportunistic. It's a fascinating debate, as it speaks to the evolving scale of their maritime ambitions. Regardless, when a whale was successfully hunted, it was a massive event, a community-wide effort to process every ounce of its immense bounty. The smell, I'm told, was memorable. Let's just say it wasn't for the faint of heart or nose. Now, while cattle, pigs, sheep, seals, and whales were the primary contributors, the Vikings, ever the pragmatists, wouldn't have turned their noses up at fat from other wild animals if the opportunity arose. Deer, bears, even smaller game animals, all contributed their modest amounts of fat to the collective Viking larder. You might see a hunter returning from the forest, not just with meat for the pot, but with precious pockets of fat carefully preserved, knowing its value for the myriad uses, including the integrity of their ships. One mainstream historical fact that underscores all of this is the incredible self-sufficiency of Viking society. They weren't just warriors. They were expert farmers, fishermen, and hunters, deeply connected to their environment and incredibly skilled at extracting every possible resource from it. Their very survival, and their ability to launch their epic voyages, hinged on this intimate understanding and exploitation of the natural world around them. And for a quirky tidbit, while we focus on waterproofing, some fringe theories suggest that certain types of animal fat, particularly blubber, might have been intentionally mixed with other substances not just for sealing, but potentially to create a smoother, more hydrodynamic surface on the hull, reducing drag. Imagine the Vikings inadvertently inventing a primitive form of hull coating that made their ships glide even faster. While definitive proof is elusive, it certainly sparks the imagination. It's a bit like finding out your great-grandma's secret ingredient for her famous pie wasn't just love, but a tiny dash of rocket fuel. Probably not, but wouldn't that be something? So, as you stand there, observing this bustling scene of animal husbandry and the anticipation of the harvest, you begin to grasp the sheer scale of the operation. It wasn't just about finding some fat. It was about managing entire herds, mastering the hunt, and efficiently processing vast quantities of animal products. The animals weren't just food. They were the very lifeblood of the Viking Age, providing the essential ingredients that allowed their magnificent ships to defy the waves and carry them to the ends of the earth. You stand before the hearth, the air thick with the promise of transformation, a scent that's a curious blend of raw earthiness and something almost savory. Around you, the fruits of yesterday's labors, or perhaps last week's, lie in glistening piles. Great hunks of animal fat, freshly butchered, still bearing the chill of the northern air. This isn't just any fat. It's the very essence of the beasts we discussed, now destined for a new life, not as sustenance, but as a silent, steadfast guardian of the waves. Your task, and the task of those around you, is to coax this raw material into what the sagas might have called liquid gold. The first step, deceptively simple yet utterly crucial, is preparation. You pick up a hefty chunk of suet, perhaps from a recently felled reindeer, its texture firm and waxy. With a well-honed knife, you begin the rhythmic, almost meditative process of chopping. Not just dicing, mind you, but meticulously mincing, reducing these large, unwieldy masses into smaller, more manageable pieces. Think of it like preparing ingredients for a very, very large stew, except the only ingredient is fat, and the desired outcome isn't dinner but seaworthiness. You work alongside others, the thwack 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 of knives against wooden blocks creating a steady rhythm, a percussive backdrop to the quiet hum of communal effort. Each piece, no matter how small, contributes to the overall surface area, allowing the fat to melt more efficiently when introduced to heat. It's a tedious job, certainly, but one that demands patience and precision. No one wants to find a rogue lump of unrendered tissue clogging a seam later. Once the fat is sufficiently minced, resembling perhaps a particularly unappetizing mound of yellowish-white gravel, it's time for the main event, the rendering. You approach the heart of the operation. A massive iron cauldron, blackened with countless fires, suspended over a slow-burning flame. These cauldrons, often prized possessions, were the industrial furnaces of their day, capable of holding vast quantities. You begin to scoop the minced fat into the pot, the clatter of the scoops against the iron echoing slightly in the vastness of the longhouse. Slowly, deliberately, the pot fills until it's a shimmering, undulating mass of raw animal essence. Now the fire. This isn't a roaring blaze meant for quick boiling. Oh no, this is a subtle art, a lesson in controlled heat. You feed the flames with care, perhaps adding smaller, seasoned logs, ensuring a steady, gentle warmth rather than an aggressive inferno. The goal is to melt the fat slowly, allowing it to release its pure oil without scorching or burning the precious substance. You begin to feel the warmth radiating from the pot, a comforting heat that chases away the lingering chill of the northern air. The air around the cauldron grows heavy, moist with the rising steam. As the heat permeates the fat, a remarkable transformation begins. The solid chunks at the bottom start to soften, then liquefy, pooling into a clear, golden oil. You watch, mesmerized, as the more fibrous, fleshy bits, the connective tissues and membranes, begin to shrivel and separate, floating to the surface like tiny, unwanted islands. This is the crucial stage of purification. The process is slow, often taking hours, sometimes even a full day, depending on the volume. You stir constantly, gently, with a long wooden paddle, ensuring even heat distribution and preventing anything from sticking to the bottom and burning. The bubbling sound is a soft, continuous whisper, punctuated by the occasional plop as a larger piece of fat finally gives way to the heat. The smell, by now, is pervasive. It's not unpleasant, not exactly, but it's certainly distinct. A rich, fatty aroma, almost like deep frying on a grand scale, but without the crispiness. It clings to your clothes, your hair, even seems to seep into the very timbers of the longhouse. If you were hoping for a quick aromatherapy session, this isn't it. More like an olfactory immersion experience. And if you think that's bad, just imagine trying to explain to your modern self why you smell faintly of a very large, slowly melting candle. As the fat continues to render, the impurities, now a darker, more brittle substance known as cracklings or greaves, rise consistently to the top. This is where the meticulous work of skimming comes in. With a perforated ladle or a fine meshed sieve, you carefully, painstakingly, scoop off these unwanted bits. Each ladleful is a small victory, removing the dross to reveal the pure, shimmering liquid beneath. These cracklings weren't wasted, of course. They were often pressed for any remaining fat, then dried and used as a high-energy, if somewhat chewy, snack, or even mixed into animal feed. It's a testament to Viking resourcefulness. Absolutely nothing went to waste. One mainstream historical fact here is that the rendering of animal fats, particularly from pigs, cattle, and sheep, was a widespread practice across Europe for various purposes beyond waterproofing. Fat was a primary source for lamp oil, candle making, though the Vikings primarily used tallow from ruminants for candles, which burns cleaner, soap production, and, of course, cooking and preserving food. The sheer scale of rendering operations in Viking settlements highlights its economic and practical importance. underpinning many aspects of daily life. Once the bulk of the cracklings has been removed, the liquid gold is ready for its final purification step: filtration. This wasn't a high-tech process involving membranes and pressure systems. Instead, you might set up a simple straining apparatus. A large, clean linen cloth, perhaps, or a tightly woven basket lined with rushes or even dense moss, would be placed over another clean vessel, a wooden barrel or a large ceramic pot. You then carefully, slowly ladle the hot, rendered fat through this filter. The liquid that emerges on the other side is remarkably clear, a beautiful, translucent amber, free from any remaining solid impurities. It shimmers in the firelight, almost glowing. It's so clear you could almost use it as a mirror if you didn't mind smelling like a very well-seasoned ship. There's a quirky tidbit here. Some historians suggest that the Vikings, particularly in areas with abundant birch trees, might have even used birch bark in their filtration process. The natural resins and oils in the bark could have imparted subtle preservative qualities to the fat, or perhaps it was simply a readily available, effective filtering medium. It speaks to their deep understanding and utilization of their natural environment. As the filtered fat cools, it begins to solidify, transforming from a shimmering liquid into a creamy, pliable substance. The consistency is key. It needs to be firm enough to handle and store, but soft enough to be easily applied. If it's too hard, it will crack and be difficult to work with. If it's too soft, it won't provide the necessary barrier. This precise consistency was achieved through careful temperature control during rendering and cooling, a skill passed down through generations. Historians still argue whether different Viking communities had preferred consistencies for their waterproofing fats, perhaps varying based on the specific climate of their home port or the expected conditions of their voyages. Some might have aimed for a harder tallow for colder waters, others a softer lard for ease of application in less extreme climates. Once solidified, the rendered fat, now a beautiful, pale yellow or off-white, is carefully scooped into storage containers. These might be sealed wooden barrels, stout leather bags, or even animal bladders. Anything that could protect the precious substance from contamination and spoilage. These containers, once filled, would be stored in cool, dark places, ready to be brought out when a ship needed its vital coating. The weight of these filled barrels would be considerable, a tangible representation of the immense effort and resources invested in keeping their vessels afloat. And there you have it, the transformation complete. From raw, unappealing chunks of animal fat, through hours of chopping, slow heating, meticulous skimming, and careful filtration, you've helped produce the liquid gold. It's not flashy, not a gleaming sword or an intricately carved dragon head, but this humble, rendered fat is every bit as crucial to the Viking way of life. It's the unsung hero, the silent workhorse, without which those epic voyages, those daring explorations, would have remained nothing more than distant dreams. You wipe your hands on your tunic, the lingering scent of warm fat a reminder of the day's labor. Truly, who needs a spa day when you have the invigorating aroma of animal rendering to cleanse your soul? You stand now, not by the lapping waves, but beneath the colossal belly of a longship, hauled high onto the shore, its proud keel resting on sturdy timbers. The air, usually crisp with sea salt, carries a faint, almost buttery aroma, a testament to the colossal vats of rendered animal fat cooling nearby. This isn't your typical Sunday afternoon car wash. Oh no. This is the ultimate spa day for a wooden vessel, a meticulous, greasy ritual that ensures its very survival on the unforgiving North Atlantic. And you, my friend, are about to get your hands, well, everything truly dirty. Before you even think about slathering on the good stuff, there's the preparation. Imagine the sheer effort involved in beaching a ship of this size, then carefully propping it up so every inch of its hull is accessible. You're not just looking at a quick wipe down. Every barnacle, every stubborn patch of algae, every last speck of marine growth must be scraped away. You run your hand along the rough, seasoned oak, feeling the grooves and imperfections. This isn't just about aesthetics. It's about creating a clean canvas for the protective layer. Forget your fancy ergonomic brushes. Here, the tools are as elemental as the task itself. Rough-hewn scrapers, stiff brushes made from animal bristles, and perhaps even bundles of coarse heather. It's hard, back-breaking work, the rhythmic scrape, scrape, scrape echoing beneath the hull, a symphony of preparation. No, they didn't have pressure washers. Imagine trying to explain that to a Viking. So, you use magic water to clean? You'd probably get a blank stare, followed by an offer of a very large axe. Once the wood is as clean as they can get it, a process that could take days for a large vessel, the true work begins. The rendered fat, kept warm and pliable over a low fire, is brought forth in large, heavy wooden buckets. It gleams, a rich, golden-brown liquid gold, thick and viscous, almost like a very slow-motion honey. Historians still debate the precise temperature at which the fat was applied. Was it warmed significantly to be liquid, or just softened to a pliable paste? The consensus leans towards a warm, workable consistency, not boiling hot, which would be dangerous and impractical, but warm enough to spread easily and penetrate the wood's surface. You dip a large, coarse brush, perhaps fashioned from horsehair, into the bucket. The fat clings to the bristles, dripping slightly, ready for its purpose. You begin on the broad, sweeping planks of the hull. With deliberate, long strokes, you paint the fat onto the wood. It soaks in, slowly at first, then more readily as the wood begins to absorb the richness. You can almost feel the timber sighing in relief, drinking in the moisture and protection. The wood darkens under the application, taking on a deeper, richer hue, almost a wet sheen that belies its true dryness beneath. This isn't a quick splash and dash. Every inch must be covered, every stroke overlapping, ensuring no patch is missed. You might even use your hands, gloved perhaps with a thick hide or simply bare and calloused, to work the fat deeply into the grain, feeling the subtle textures of the oak and pine. If you ever wanted to know what elbow grease truly means, this is it. And by elbow, I mean up to your armpit. But the planks, as important as they are only half the battle. The true genius, and the most meticulous part of this process, lies in the seams. You see, Viking ships were predominantly clinker-built. This means their planks overlapped like scales on a fish, fastened together with iron rivets or wooden pegs. These overlaps, while incredibly strong and flexible, created tiny, inherent gaps, perfect little invitations for seawater to seep in. This is where the fat truly earned its keep. With smaller, stiffer brushes, or even just your fingers, you meticulously work the thick, warm fat into every single seam, every overlap, every rivet hole. It's a slow, painstaking process. You push and prod, ensuring the fat is forced into the tightest crevices, creating a waterproof barrier that would flex and move with the ship, rather than crack and break like rigid pitch. Imagine the focus required. You can't rush this. A missed spot, a poorly filled seam, could mean the difference between a successful voyage and a slow, agonizing leak miles from shore. You bend low, your face close to the wood, peering into the shadows of the overlaps, making sure the fat fills every void. The consistency of the fat is critical here. Too thin, and it won't stay put. Too thick, and it won't penetrate. It needs to be just right, a pliable, sticky bomb that can be worked into the wood and then solidify enough to stay in place, forming a resilient seal. This is where the hands-on aspect truly shines. You are literally feeling the ship, becoming intimately familiar with every curve and join, ensuring its integrity. The air fills with the subtle scent of warm fat and damp wood. It's a smell that would have permeated the shipyards, clung to the clothes of the workers, and perhaps, some fringe theories suggest, even been carried on the wind, a distinctive marker of a Viking vessel. Think of it as the ultimate natural sealant, long before silicone was a glint in a chemist's eye. There's a certain satisfaction in watching the raw, thirsty wood transform under your touch, taking on a healthy, almost vital glow. You move along the hull, section by section, a steady, unhurried pace. From keel to gunwale, inside and out where splash might reach, the fatty concoction is applied. It adheres to the wood, forming a protective skin that would repel water like a duck's feathers. This wasn't just about making the ship float. It was about making it endure. It was about giving it the best possible chance against the brutal elements of the open sea. The sun, if it's out, helps the fat to penetrate further, making the wood almost glisten with the absorbed oil. It's a messy job, yes, but a deeply satisfying one, knowing that your meticulous efforts are literally shoring up the very foundation of the journey ahead. The ship, once a collection of planks, now feels like a living, breathing entity, prepared for the challenge. You drift now, not quite awake, not quite asleep, as the gentle rocking of the unseen waves lulls you deeper into the quietude of this story. We've talked about keeping the water out, haven't we? That immediate, pressing need to stop the ocean from claiming your precious cargo and crew. But the Viking mind, ever so practical, ever so attuned to the whispers of the natural world, understood something far more profound. This greasy concoction, this seemingly simple application of animal fat, was not merely a barrier against the immediate deluge. Oh no, it was, in essence, a deep conditioner for the very soul of the ship. Think of it less as a raincoat and more as a comprehensive skincare routine for a giant, wooden beast. Imagine the wood itself, the very planks that form your longship's hull. They are, despite their strength, living things, or at least they once were. They breathe, they expand, they contract. This constant, subtle movement, driven by the relentless cycle of wetting and drying, is the silent killer of wooden vessels. When wood gets wet, its fibers swell. When it dries, they shrink. Over time, this ceaseless expansion and contraction stresses the joints, opens up tiny, hairline cracks, and generally weakens the entire structure. It's like repeatedly bending a paperclip back and forth until it snaps. The Vikings, perhaps not with a scientific understanding of cellular structure, but with an innate generational wisdom born of observation, grasped this fundamental truth. Their fat wasn't just a sealant, it was a regulator. It didn't entirely prevent water from ever touching the wood, but it dramatically slowed down the ingress and egress of moisture. It allowed the wood to breathe, yes, but at a controlled, leisurely pace, minimizing those destructive cycles of swelling and shrinking. It was the world's first slow-release moisturizer for timber, ensuring the planks remained supple, less prone to the brittle cracks that would eventually doom lesser ships. You can almost feel the wood, under your fingertips, retaining a certain pliancy, a resilience that speaks of its sustained health rather than a quick fix. Then there's the sun, that glorious, life-giving orb that, paradoxically, can be a relentless enemy to wood. Ultraviolet, UV, radiation, the very same rays that give you a lovely tan or a nasty sunburn if you're not careful, relentlessly breaks down lignin, the natural polymer that acts as the glue holding wood fibers together. Over time, this UV degradation leads to the wood becoming gray, brittle, and prone to splintering. It's why an old, untreated fence looks so weathered and worn. The rendered animal fat, applied meticulously to the ship's surface, acted as a remarkably effective sunscreen for the timber. It created a protective layer that absorbed or reflected a significant portion of those damaging UV rays, shielding the underlying wood fibers from their destructive embrace. So, while you were out there, perhaps getting a healthy glow from the North Sea sun, your ship was quietly enjoying its own, rather greasy SPF factor. It was like the world's first sunblock for timber, though I doubt anyone was worried about tan lines on their longship. But the sea holds more than just water and sun. It teems with life, some of which has a rather unhealthy appetite for wood. We're talking about marine borers, those insidious creatures like shipworms, Teredo novalis, and gribble, Limnoria lignorum. These aren't worms at all, but bizarre bivalve mollusks that, much like termites on land, tunnel through wood, turning sturdy planks into a honeycomb of destruction. A single shipworm can grow to several feet long, and in sufficient numbers, they can absolutely devastate a wooden hull in a surprisingly short amount of time. Historians still argue whether the fat actively repelled these creatures through chemical means, or if it was primarily a physical barrier that simply made the wood less accessible and less appealing for attachment and boring. Regardless of the exact mechanism, the fatty layer presented a formidable challenge. Imagine trying to burrow through a slick, greasy surface. It's not exactly ideal for getting a good grip. Plus, the fat could potentially fill the microscopic pores and crevices where the larvae of these pests might try to establish themselves, essentially sealing them out. It was a silent, greasy war waged against the unseen enemies of the deep, a testament to the Vikings' foresight in protecting their most vital asset. And then there's the ever-present threat of rot. Wood rot is primarily caused by fungi and bacteria that thrive in damp, oxygen-rich environments. They break down the cellulose and lignin, turning strong timber into spongy, crumbling decay. By sealing the wood with fat, the Vikings severely limited the access of both moisture and oxygen to the underlying fibers. While some moisture would inevitably penetrate, the fat significantly reduced the conditions necessary for these destructive microorganisms to flourish. It was like putting the wood in a low-oxygen, low-humidity vault, making it an incredibly inhospitable environment for rot-causing agents. You can almost imagine the sigh of relief from the timber, no longer constantly battling the insidious creep of decay. This was a mainstream historical problem for all maritime cultures. From the Romans charring their hulls to the Venetians using lead sheathing, preserving wood from rot was paramount. The Vikings, however, found a solution both effective and remarkably sustainable given their available resources. Beyond these specific threats, the fat contributed to the overall suppleness of the wood. A ship is not a rigid box. It flexes and twists with the waves, absorbing the immense forces of the ocean. Dry, brittle wood is far more prone to cracking under such stress. The fat, permeating the surface layers, helped to keep the wood fibers lubricated and pliable, allowing the hull to flex more effectively without developing microfractures. It was like a constant conditioning treatment, ensuring the ship remained agile and resilient, absorbing shocks rather than succumbing to them. Think of it like conditioning your leather boots. You wouldn't let them dry out and crack, would you? The same principle applied to their ships, just on a much grander, more vital scale. This multifaceted protection meant more than just a ship that didn't sink immediately. It meant a ship that lasted longer, required less frequent and less intensive repairs, and remained seaworthy for many more voyages. Imagine the sheer economic and logistical advantage of having a fleet of durable vessels that could withstand the rigors of the North Atlantic for years, even decades, with proper care. It reduced downtime for maintenance, freed up valuable labor, and allowed for more ambitious, longer-distance expeditions. It was, in effect, a massive return on investment for all that laborious fat rendering and application. You might even joke that it was the original set-it-and-forget-it maintenance plan, though of course they certainly didn't forget it entirely. They just made the maintenance much more manageable. So, as you feel the smooth, almost slick surface of the longship beneath your hand, remember that this wasn't just about stopping a leak. It was about nurturing the very material that carried them across the known world and beyond. It was about an intuitive, practical understanding of natural resources, turning the byproducts of their animal husbandry into the lifeblood of their maritime ambitions. The Vikings weren't just patching holes. They were preserving the very essence of their vessels, ensuring their longevity and, by extension, the longevity of their incredible saga. You stand there, perhaps a bit sticky from imagining all that fat, and you start to truly grasp the monumental scale of what we're talking about. This wasn't some individual's weekend project, like deciding to finally clean out the garage, only to find a long-lost pet hamster. Hopefully not. Oh no. This was an undertaking that demanded the very sinews of an entire community. A collective effort so vast it would make your local town's annual charity bake sale look like a single person whispering to a cupcake. We're not talking about a few tubs of Crisco here. We're talking about metric tons of the stuff, if metric tons had been invented yet, which they definitely weren't. Imagine for a moment the sheer volume of raw material required to slather a longship, not just once, but multiple times over its lifespan. A single longship, stretching perhaps 70 or 80 feet, with its overlapping planks and countless seams, presented an insatiable appetite for grease. Now multiply that by the dozens, sometimes hundreds, of ships that might be built and maintained by a larger Viking settlement or a regional network of villages. You quickly realize that this wasn't just a task. It was an industry. And in the Viking Age, industries weren't run by corporations with shareholders and quarterly reports. They were run by everyone. This wasn't a job for the shipwrights alone, or the warriors, or even just the designated grease gnomes. A delightful, if historically inaccurate, title I just invented. No, from the youngest child capable of carrying a small load of kindling to the wizened elder overseeing the fires, everyone had a role to play. Think of it as the ultimate community potluck, except instead of bringing a casserole, you're bringing a bucket of freshly rendered animal fat, and instead of eating it, you're slathering it onto a massive wooden boat. It was a societal imperative, a shared responsibility that bound them together, much like the fat bound to the wood. The process began long before the first cauldrons were even set over the fires. It started with the hunt, or with the carefully managed herds. You can picture the groups setting out not just for meat, but specifically for the precious fat. For marine mammals, this often meant daring expeditions into the icy waters. It's a mainstream historical fact that whaling and sealing were significant activities for Viking communities, providing not only food but also invaluable blubber. Imagine the coordination required. Multiple small boats, harpoons at the ready, the sheer physical strength needed to haul a massive whale or a sleek seal onto shore, or even to process it at sea. The risks were immense, but the reward, a veritable mountain of blubber, was worth it. On land, the story was different but no less demanding. Your livestock, your pigs, cattle, and sheep weren't just for daily sustenance. They were walking, breathing reservoirs of the precious waterproofing agent. When an animal was slaughtered, every single part was utilized, and the fat was certainly no exception. You'd see families carefully trimming the fat from every cut of meat, not a scrap wasted. It was a meticulous, almost ritualistic process, driven by a deep understanding of resource scarcity and the absolute necessity of preparation for the harsh realities of their environment. Nothing was thrown away that could be repurposed, especially not something as vital as fat. Once gathered, the raw fat, whether from blubber or suet, had to be rendered. This wasn't a quick process. Imagine enormous iron cauldrons, some large enough to bathe a small horse, bubbling over roaring fires for hours, sometimes days on end. You'd see the plumes of greasy smoke rising into the air, carrying the distinct, pervasive aroma of melting animal fat. A smell that would cling to your clothes, your hair, and probably your very soul. It wasn't exactly Chanel No. 5, let's put it that way. Your village would smell like a particularly enthusiastic deep fryer for weeks, and you just learned to live with it. This rendering process demanded constant attention. Someone had to keep the fires stoked. Someone else had to stir the bubbling, viscous liquid to prevent scorching, while others skimmed off impurities. It was a hot, greasy, and incredibly laborious task, often taking place outdoors, exposed to the elements. During the long, dark winters, perhaps this work moved indoors to specially constructed rendering houses, where the heat from the fires would provide some welcome warmth. But even then, the air would be thick with steam and the smell of cooking fat. It was a community sauna, but instead of relaxation, you got a full-body grease coating. And what about the sheer volume? Think about it. A single whale could yield hundreds, if not thousands, of pounds of blubber. A large pig, a good 50 pounds of fat. Multiply that by the number of animals needed for just one ship, and you quickly realize the staggering quantities involved. This wasn't just bring your pig to work day. It was bring all the pigs and their cousins, and their second cousins twice removed, and maybe that stray boar you cornered last week. The logistics alone were mind-boggling. Historians still debate the exact proportion of land animal fat versus marine mammal fat used in different Viking regions, wondering if local availability dictated preference more than any perceived superiority of one type of fat over another. It's a fascinating question, highlighting the adaptability of these resourceful people. Once rendered and cooled, the liquid gold transformed into a semi-solid, pliable substance. But where do you put it all? You can't just leave it lying around. It had to be stored, often in large wooden barrels or sturdy clay pots, kept in cool, dark places to prevent spoilage. Imagine rows upon rows of these containers, meticulously labeled, or perhaps just remembered by the person who put them there, waiting for the day they would be hauled down to the shipbuilding site. The storage facilities themselves would have been a significant undertaking, requiring space and careful management to protect this vital resource from pests or extreme temperatures. The actual application of the fat to the ships was also a communal affair. While the shipwrights might lead the charge, ensuring the most critical areas were properly sealed. Many hands would have been involved in the broader greasing. You'd see lines of people, buckets of fat in hand, working their way along the hull, applying the greasy concoction with anything from specialized tools to simple rags, or even just their bare hands. It was a messy business, but one performed with a shared sense of purpose. Everyone understood that the safety of their kin, the success of their voyages, and the prosperity of their settlement depended on the integrity of those hulls. This communal effort wasn't just about labor. It was about shared knowledge, passed down through generations. Grandparents would teach their grandchildren the best way to trim blubber, the precise temperature for rendering, or the most effective technique for applying the fat to the wood. There were probably unwritten rules, perhaps even a few superstitions about the process. Maybe you never rendered fat on a Tuesday, or always started the process under a full moon. A quirky tidbit is that some sagas hint at a belief that ships treated with fat from particularly strong or wise animals might gain some of those qualities, though this is more folklore than documented practice. I bet there was always one Viking who was supervising with a horn of mead, offering helpful suggestions like, if you just stir it a little faster, it'll be done sooner. Ultimately, this vast, greasy, community-wide undertaking was a testament to the Vikings' pragmatism and their deep understanding of their environment. They didn't have sophisticated chemicals or advanced manufacturing processes. What they had was ingenuity, hard work, and an unshakable belief in the power of collective action. They knew that their very survival depended on their ability to conquer the seas, and conquering the seas meant ensuring their ships were watertight. And for that, they needed everyone, pooling their resources, their strength, and their know-how to turn animal fat into the lifeblood of their maritime empire. It was messy, it was smelly, but it was absolutely essential. You've seen the meticulous effort, the communal grind, involved in transforming raw animal fat into that golden, viscous balm for your ship. But now, as you stand back, perhaps with a smudge of grease on your cheek that you're just a little too tired to wipe off, you start to grasp something profound. This isn't just a waterproofing agent. It's a currency. It's a resource so vital, so versatile, that it begins to shape the very fabric of Viking society, influencing trade networks, resource management, and even, dare I say, the concept of wealth itself. Imagine, if you will, the Viking equivalent of a modern-day oil baron, not drilling for black gold, but rendering blubber, their hands perpetually slick, their clothes smelling faintly of the sea and something that vaguely resembles a very, very old candle. This isn't just about keeping water out of your longship. It's about illuminating your homes through long, dark winters, preserving food that would otherwise spoil, softening leather for your boots and sails, and even, for the truly discerning Viking, making a rudimentary, if somewhat pungent, soap. This multifaceted utility elevates animal fat from a mere practical necessity to an indispensable commodity, a true linchpin of the Norse economy. You see it in the hushed negotiations around the trading posts of Hedeby or Birka, where the clink of silver arm rings mingles with the earthy scent of furs and the distinct aroma of rendered fat. A barrel of whale oil, carefully sealed and transported, might be worth a fine sword, or a bolt of imported silk, or even a handful of slaves captured on a recent raid. It's a liquid asset, quite literally, and its value is understood by everyone, from the lowliest thrall tasked with collecting blubber to the most powerful jarl overseeing vast hunting territories. You could say it was the original greased lightning of the Viking economy, fast, effective, and highly sought after. Think about the sheer logistics involved. We're not talking about a couple of buckets here. To maintain a fleet of longships, to light a settlement, to preserve enough meat to last through a harsh winter, you needed tons of the stuff. This wasn't a solo endeavor. It required coordinated hunting expeditions for whales and seals in the frigid northern waters, or careful management of domestic livestock. You can picture the hunters returning, their small boats laden low with blubber, a collective cheer rising from the shore. This wasn't just a good hunt. It was a boost to the communal coffers, a tangible increase in the village's strategic reserves. The procurement of this liquid gold often dictated settlement patterns and even intercommunity relations. Coastal communities, blessed with access to marine mammals, held a distinct advantage. They became centers for rendering and storage, their shores dotted with the telltale signs of blubber processing, the lingering smell, the piles of discarded bone, the dark stains on the earth. Inland communities, while perhaps rich in timber or iron, would need to trade for fat, creating intricate networks of exchange that stretched across vast distances. Imagine a longship sailing up a river, not just with plunder, but with barrels of precious fat, destined for a chieftain who needed it for his winter stores or to waterproof a new warship. It's a testament to their foresight that they understood the long-term value of such a resource. This wasn't just about immediate use, it was about resource management on a grand scale. The Vikings, ever the pragmatists, understood the concept of sustainable harvesting long before the term was coined. While they were fierce hunters, they weren't foolish. You can imagine the elders discussing the whale migration patterns, the seal breeding grounds, ensuring that their vital sources of fat weren't depleted. It was a delicate balance between immediate need and future provision. Of course, there were probably occasional arguments too, like, "Olaf, did you really need to take that many seals this season? We're going to run low for the winter." Because even in Viking times, resource arguments were a thing. One mainstream historical fact that underscores this commodity status is the discovery of extensive evidence of blubber processing at various Viking Age sites, particularly in Greenland and Iceland. Archaeologists have unearthed vast quantities of whale and seal bones, alongside large hearths and processing pits, indicating industrial-scale rendering operations. These weren't just small family affairs. They were organized endeavors, suggesting a significant economic driver. This wasn't just a byproduct of hunting. It was a primary product in itself, carefully managed and stored. And speaking of storage, that's where the resource management truly shone. You picture large wooden barrels, meticulously crafted and sealed with pitch, filled to the brim with rendered fat. These weren't just tucked away in a corner. They were carefully inventoried, perhaps even marked with runes indicating their contents and origin. Imagine the Viking equivalent of a stock exchange, only instead of ticker tapes, you have a scribe counting barrels of blubber in a dimly lit longhouse. This wasn't just haphazard collection. It was a system designed to ensure that this crucial commodity was available when and where it was needed most. A quirky tidbit that highlights the value of fat is its use as a form of payment or tribute. There are accounts, albeit sometimes sparse, suggesting that certain communities or individuals might pay their dues to a jarl or king not just in silver or labor, but in specific quantities of rendered animal fat. Imagine being taxed in blubber. Right, Harold, your yearly tribute is 3 barrels of prime whale oil and 2 dozen furs. Don't be late, or your ship won't be seeing the open sea this spring. It gives a whole new meaning to the phrase, paying your dues. This wasn't just a practical material, it was integrated into the very social and economic hierarchy. Historians still argue whether fat was primarily a local commodity, mostly consumed and exchanged within communities, or if it formed a significant part of the long-distance trade networks that stretched from North America to the Middle East. While we know furs, amber, slaves, and walrus ivory were major exports, the extent to which rendered fat traversed these vast distances as a primary trade good, rather than a ship's provision, remains a subject of ongoing scholarly debate. Was it the Viking equivalent of crude oil, shipped globally, or more like local heating oil, mostly distributed regionally? The truth likely lies somewhere in between, varying by source and demand. You understand now that the Vikings' mastery of animal fats wasn't just a clever trick. It was a foundational pillar of their expansion. It fueled their ships, yes, but it also fueled their economy, their communities, and their very ability to survive and thrive in a harsh world. This greasy solution, born of necessity, evolved into a valuable commodity that underpinned their resourcefulness and their relentless drive to explore and conquer. It was, in essence, the very grease that kept the gears of their world turning. You've seen the longship, gleaming with its fresh coat of rendered fat, a testament to ingenuity and communal effort. But here's the thing about grand endeavors and the unforgiving sea. Nothing lasts forever. That beautiful, protective sheen is constantly under assault. You see, the ocean, for all its majesty, is also a relentless, abrasive force. It's like a giant, liquid sandpaper, always working to strip away your carefully applied layers. Not to mention the sun's UV rays doing their best to bake and crack the fat, turning it from a supple barrier into something more akin to old, brittle wax. So, you stand now not at the beginning of a grand voyage, but at the end of one, or perhaps just a pause between journeys. Your ship, a marvel of Viking craftsmanship, needs a spa day. A really, really greasy spa day. This isn't a set it and forget it kind of deal, like putting a protective film on your phone and hoping for the best. Oh no, maintaining seaworthiness, especially when your life literally depends on it, requires continuous, often back-breaking, care. It's the maritime equivalent of remembering to change your car's oil, rotate its tires, and occasionally give it a bath. Except if you forget, your car doesn't usually sink to the bottom of the North Sea. You watch as the crew prepares the ship for its regular inspection. If you're near a suitable shoreline, you might beach it at high tide, letting the water recede and expose the hull. Or, in a more sheltered harbor, perhaps you careen it, tipping the ship on its side so one half of the hull is out of the water, then repeating the process for the other side. Imagine the effort involved in that. It's not exactly a quick trip to the car wash. You're not just looking for obvious holes or cracks. You're scrutinizing every plank, every seam, every rivet where the fat might have worn thin. You run your hand along the hull, feeling for areas that are no longer slick and smooth, but instead feel gritty, dry, or even slightly tacky, indicating that the protective layer is compromised. It's like finding a particularly stubborn bit of dried glue on a freshly polished surface. Only this bit of glue could lead to hypothermia. The signs are everywhere if you know what to look for. You see the faint streaks where the fat has been scoured away by waves and currents. There are the subtle discolorations where water has started to penetrate the wood, hinting at the timber's thirst returning. Around the waterline, where the ship constantly meets the churn of the sea, the wear is most pronounced. This is where the fat works hardest and consequently, where it breaks down fastest. It's a bit like the hem of your trousers after a rainy walk. Always the first part to show the wear and tear. You might even spot a tiny, almost imperceptible seep of water from an unfattened seam. A silent, chilling warning that the ship's integrity is slowly, steadily being compromised. Once the assessment is complete, the messy work begins. The old, degraded fat needs to be removed. You might see crew members scraping away the crusty, often rancid remnants with simple tools, perhaps a sharpened piece of wood, or an iron scraper if they're lucky enough to have one. The smell, oh, the smell. Imagine the aroma of old, sun-baked animal fat mixed with salt and damp wood. It's not exactly a perfume you'd bottle, let's put it that way. This isn't a quick wipe down. It's a thorough exfoliation of the ship's skin, removing all the accumulated grime, barnacles, and what can only be described as sea gunk that has clung to the hull. This meticulous cleaning prevents new fat from being applied over a compromised base, ensuring maximum adhesion and protection. Think of it as preparing a wall for a fresh coat of paint. You wouldn't just paint over peeling flakes, would you? Well, you might, but a Viking shipwright certainly wouldn't. After the scraping, perhaps a gentle heating. Some historians still debate the precise methods used for removing old fat, with some suggesting that a small, controlled fire might have been used nearby to warm the hull and soften the old fat for easier removal, while others argue that simple tools and elbow grease would have sufficed, given the risks of fire near a wooden vessel. Whatever the method, the goal is clear. A clean, dry surface, ready to receive its new protective layer. This preparation is critical as any residual moisture or old, degraded fat would prevent the fresh application from bonding properly, leaving weak spots vulnerable to the sea's relentless assault. It's like trying to put a bandage on a wound that hasn't been cleaned. It just won't stick. Then comes the reapplication. You watch as fresh batches of the rendered fat, still warm and pliable, perhaps kept near a small fire to maintain its consistency, are brought forth. The crew, working in teams, begins the painstaking process of regreasing. They use cloths, brushes made from animal hair, or even just their bare, calloused hands, spreading the fat evenly over the planks and into every crevice. You can almost feel the satisfying squish as the fat is worked into the grain of the wood, filling microscopic cracks and forming that essential barrier. It's a rhythmic, almost meditative process, the quiet hum of activity broken only by the lapping of waves or the occasional grunt of effort. Each stroke is deliberate, each patch of wood carefully coated, because a single missed spot could spell disaster on the open ocean. This continuous maintenance, this ritual of inspection and reapplication, wasn't just about waterproofing. It was about preserving the life of the ship. The fat, beyond its primary function, also acted as a preservative for the wood itself. It deterred wood-boring organisms that might otherwise feast on the timber. It kept the wood from drying out and cracking in the sun, especially during periods when the ship was out of the water. This dual action, waterproofing and preservation, extended the working life of these magnificent vessels, allowing them to undertake multiple voyages over many years. It's a bit like putting sunscreen on yourself and moisturizer. Two birds, one greasy stone. Mainstream historical fact: the longevity of Viking longships, often serving for decades, is a testament to their robust construction combined with such meticulous ongoing care and maintenance, allowing for the repeated transatlantic voyages that are now well documented. Consider the sheer scale of the undertaking. It wasn't just one person with a bucket of grease. It was a communal effort, often involving many hands, from the youngest apprentice learning the ropes to the most seasoned shipwright overseeing the work. While the initial rendering of fat might have been a large seasonal undertaking, the regreasing would be a continuous, cyclical task performed by the ship's crew or a dedicated maintenance team at various ports or landing sites. It fostered a deep sense of ownership and responsibility for their vessel, understanding that their collective survival depended on the ship's integrity. Everyone had a role, everyone contributed, cementing the bond between crew, ship, and the sea. And what about those quirky tidbits? Well, some Old Norse sagas and archaeological evidence hint that the Vikings might have even used various pigments, perhaps from ochre or other natural sources, mixed into their fat coatings. While primarily for aesthetic purposes, imagine a longship with a striking red or yellow hull. These pigments could also have offered additional UV protection or even mild anti-fouling properties. Though this is a more speculative, fringe tidbit. Imagine, not just a waterproof ship, but a stylish waterproof ship. It adds another layer to their practical genius, doesn't it? So, you see, the relationship between the Vikings and their ships was not one of simple ownership, but of deep symbiosis. The ship provided passage, protection, and prosperity. In return, it demanded constant vigilance, tireless effort, and a generous application of rendered animal fat. This ongoing care, this unwavering commitment to seaworthiness, was fundamental to their success. It wasn't just about building a good ship. It was about keeping a good ship, well, good. It ensured that when the call of the waves came, when new lands beckoned across the treacherous expanse, their longships were always ready, always reliable, always able to slice through the water, protected by that unseen, invaluable layer of animal fat. This continuous cycle of use, wear, and diligent renewal is a profound reflection of the practicality of Viking minds. Now you stand, not just at the edge of the world, but on it, perched on the deck of a Viking longship, her timbers groaning, not in protest, but in a rhythmic symphony with the vast, rolling expanse of the North Sea. Feel the subtle rise and fall beneath your feet, the deck a living thing, breathing with the ocean. But this isn't just any wooden vessel battling the relentless ingress of seawater. This is a ship that has been lovingly, meticulously, and rather liberally coated in the very essence of animal fat. Take a deep breath. Can you almost catch a faint, subtle scent carried on the salty air? It's not unpleasant, not greasy in the way you might imagine a modern fast food wrapper to be, but something earthy, primal, a hint of the land clinging to this vessel of the sea. As the longship, sleek and purposeful, begins to cut through the waves, you feel an undeniable difference. There's a quiet efficiency to her movement, a whisper of water parting around her hull that feels almost too smooth. It's as if the very surface of the ship has been given a new skin, one designed to embrace the water, yet repel its deepest ambitions. Imagine the bow slicing through a particularly boisterous wave. Instead of the water clinging, soaking into the rough grain of the wood, you observe it bead and cascade away, almost reluctantly. It's like watching water dance on a freshly waxed car, only on a grand maritime scale. The spray, often a brutal, biting assault in these northern latitudes, seems to lose some of its icy sting as it hits the greased planks. It doesn't soak in, doesn't cling with the same chilling tenacity. Instead, it seems to disperse, droplets shimmering briefly on the fatty surface before being whisked away by the wind, leaving the wood beneath remarkably dry. You might even find yourself thinking, well, isn't that just slick? A little chuckle escaping your lips as the ship glides on. This isn't just about keeping the ship afloat. It's about transforming the very experience of being at sea. The constant damp, the insidious chill that seeps into your bones from wet clothes and even wetter surroundings, is subtly, yet significantly lessened. The fat acts as an unseen guardian, a silent, greasy shield against the elements. It's a bit like having a very large, very effective, and surprisingly organic raincoat for your entire vessel. You might even find yourself wishing you had a little pot of it for your own boots, just to keep your toes from turning into ice cubes. The sound, too, is altered. The relentless slosh-slosh of water against wood, the rhythmic thump-thump of waves battering an unsealed hull, is muted. Instead, you hear a smoother, more consistent whoosh as the water slides along the greased planks. It's a less violent sound, a testament to the reduced friction, the water moving with the ship rather than fighting it quite so aggressively. It's almost soothing, a lullaby of the sea, if you can get past the minor detail that your ship is essentially a giant, very fast, and extremely well-lubricated piece of marine engineering. One of the more fascinating, if subtle, benefits of this greasy coating was its potential to deter marine life. While not its primary purpose, scholars continue to discuss whether the fatty layer, perhaps due to its texture or even a faint aroma, made the hull less appealing for barnacles and other fouling organisms to attach themselves. Imagine fewer pesky hitchhikers slowing you down or requiring laborious scraping. It's like a natural, ancient anti-fouling paint, though perhaps not quite as high-tech as what you'd find on a modern yacht. This small, unlooked-for advantage only added to the ship's efficiency and longevity. The mainstream historical fact here is that Viking longships, with their shallow drafts and innovative clinker-built hulls, were already remarkably fast and agile for their time, capable of speeds that astounded their contemporaries. Adding a layer of fat, while primarily for waterproofing and wood preservation, certainly didn't hurt their performance. Historians still debate the precise extent to which this fat layer truly reduced hydrodynamic drag, but the cumulative effect of a well-maintained, well-sealed hull undoubtedly contributed to their legendary speed and ability to undertake epic voyages across vast, open oceans. They weren't just waterproof, they were slippery. Consider the crew, your fellow Vikings. Their clothes, though still subject to the inevitable spray of a storm, are less saturated. Their hands, gripping the oars or the rigging, are less prone to the agonizing chill of perpetually wet wood. This isn't just about comfort, it's about endurance. A crew that is less cold, less damp, and less prone to the debilitating effects of exposure is a crew that can row harder, sail longer, and maintain their vigilance through endless watches. The simple application of rendered animal fat, a seemingly humble concoction, translates directly into a higher level of operational readiness and human resilience. It means the difference between a journey cut short by hypothermia and a successful, daring raid on distant shores. It means the difference between reaching a new land or perishing halfway there. You might even notice the way the light catches the hull, a subtle sheen on the planks as the sun, when it dares to break through the clouds, reflects off the treated wood. It's not a polished gleam, but a soft, almost oily luminescence, a testament to the protective barrier holding the sea at bay. This isn't just science. It's art, born of necessity and observation. The Vikings weren't just building boats. They were building extensions of their will, vessels that could withstand the very fury of nature, aided by a secret weapon as old as the animals themselves. So, as your longship cuts through the waves, feel that subtle difference. The way the water seems to flow around you rather than into you. The way the biting cold of the spray is softened, the damp chill held at bay. This isn't just a ship. It's a testament to ingenuity, a floating marvel of practical engineering, kept seaworthy by the very fats that sustained life on land. It's a silent, greasy guardian, propelling you forward, enabling you to sail on greased waves, conquering the vast, untamed expanse of the ocean. You stand now not just at the edge of the known world, but at the precipice of understanding how a simple, greasy solution utterly transformed it. You've seen the timber's thirst, the futility of early sealants, and the meticulous process of rendering and applying that precious animal fat. Now, let's talk about what all that hard work unlocked. Imagine for a moment, if you will, the sheer, unadulterated audacity of the Viking voyages. These weren't just little jaunts across a calm bay for a picnic. Oh no, we're talking about pushing the boundaries of human endurance, sailing into the terrifying, unknown vastness of the Atlantic, navigating treacherous coastlines, and even crossing entire continents via river systems. And the unsung hero of these epic journeys? That humble, rendered animal fat, diligently applied to every plank and seam of their longships. Without the reliable, long-lasting waterproofing provided by this fatty concoction, these grand adventures simply wouldn't have been possible. You see, the difference between a ship that slowly but surely takes on water, forcing constant bailing and threatening to swamp, and a ship that remains relatively dry and buoyant, is the difference between a panicked retreat and a confident push into the horizon. It's the difference between a short coastal hop and a multi-week open ocean crossing. It's the difference between, oh dear, we might sink, and right, next stop, Greenland. Think about the psychological impact alone. You're out there in the middle of nowhere, just you, your crew, and the vast, indifferent ocean. Every creak of the hull, every splash against the side, would be magnified 1,000 times if you knew your ship was slowly turning into a giant, wooden sponge. But with a hull lovingly coated in fat, you could trust your vessel. You could feel the reassuring stability, the way the water seemed to shed off the well-greased planks, rather than soaking in. It was a silent, greasy promise that your ship was doing its job, allowing you to focus on navigation, or perhaps, more importantly, on not getting eaten by a sea monster or at least having a dry place to hide from one. This newfound confidence in their ships wasn't just a nice-to-have. It was utterly fundamental to the Vikings' unprecedented expansion and exploration. This waterproofing wasn't just about keeping the inside dry, it was about keeping the wood healthy. Waterlogged wood swells, rots, and loses its structural integrity, especially when exposed to the constant cycle of wet and dry, warm and cold. The fat acted as a protective barrier, preventing water absorption and, as a bonus, likely inhibiting the growth of marine organisms that would otherwise feast on the hull. It was like a very low-tech, organic anti-fouling paint, making the ships not just seaworthy for a single trip, but durably seaworthy for years of relentless service. Consider the destinations. While many associate Vikings primarily with raids on England and France, and yes, they certainly did plenty of that, their ships, made robust by this simple waterproofing, allowed them to go so much further. They sailed south along the coasts of Europe, venturing into the Mediterranean, reaching as far as North Africa and the Byzantine Empire. Imagine the cultural shock, not to mention the smell, when a longship, fresh from the North Sea, pulled into a bustling Constantinople harbor. It must have been quite the spectacle, a bit like a modern-day cruise ship pulling up to a remote jungle village. Unexpected, and probably a little intimidating. But it wasn't just south. Critically, these sturdy, well-sealed ships allowed them to push west, across the daunting North Atlantic. This is where the true epic voyages unfolded. They discovered and settled Iceland, then moved on to Greenland, establishing colonies in harsh, unforgiving landscapes. And from Greenland, they made the ultimate leap, becoming the first Europeans to reach North America, establishing a temporary settlement at L'Anse aux Meadows in modern-day Newfoundland. Yes, that's right, a mainstream historical fact for your sleepy brain. Vikings were in America centuries before Columbus, and they got there on ships that were essentially slathered in animal fat, which is arguably a more impressive feat than having fancy instruments. This ability to embark on such long-distance voyages wasn't just about exploration. It was about trade, settlement, and raiding. The waterproofing meant they could carry more cargo: furs, timber, walrus ivory, even enslaved people over vast distances, linking distant economies. It meant they could transport entire families, livestock, and supplies to new lands for settlement, creating lasting communities in places like Iceland and Greenland. And, of course, it meant they could carry their warriors, their weapons, and their formidable reputation to shores far from home, allowing them to project power and extract wealth from unsuspecting kingdoms. Historians still argue whether the primary motivation for these long voyages was purely trade, opportunistic raiding, or the desperate search for new land to settle due to growing populations and limited resources at home. But regardless of the why, the how was undeniably tied to the resilience of their ships, a resilience directly bolstered by their ingenious use of animal fats. Without this practical mastery, their ambitions would have been severely curtailed, confined to mere coastal skirmishes rather than continent-spanning adventures. It's even been suggested by some scholars that the smooth, almost slick surface created by the fat on the hull might have offered an unintended benefit, reduced friction. While this isn't proven to be a primary design goal, think about it. A smoother hull glides through the water with less resistance. It's like waxing your surfboard, or oiling a pan for a really good slidey egg. This subtle reduction in drag, combined with their highly efficient sail and/or designs, could have contributed to the surprising speed of Viking longships, allowing them to outrun many contemporary vessels and cover vast distances more quickly than rivals. Imagine the smug satisfaction of leaving a pursuing ship in your wake, knowing your secret weapon was a few gallons of rendered lard. Suckers! Should have greased your boat. You might have whispered to yourself if you weren't too busy trying to keep warm. The enduring legacy of these epic voyages, made possible by such a seemingly humble technique, is profound. It speaks to a level of practical genius that we often overlook when we think of ancient technologies. There were no complex chemical compounds, no factory production lines, just keen observation, hard work, and the intelligent application of readily available natural resources. The Vikings weren't just building ships. They were building confidence, enabling dreams of discovery, and laying the groundwork for a truly globalized world, centuries before anyone else even thought of calling it that. They set sail on greased waves, and in doing so, they wrote their names into the very fabric of global history. You drift now not on a longship, but on the quiet currents of history, observing the ebb and flow of human innovation. We've spoken of the greasy, remarkable solution the Vikings found, a true testament to their knack for coaxing utility from the most unexpected places. But as the centuries unfurl their tapestry and technology, that ever-restless beast begins to stretch its limbs, you might wonder, did the animal fats simply vanish, relegated to the dusty archives of quaint, ancient practices? Oh, far from it, my friend. While the specific methods certainly evolved, the spirit of that Viking ingenuity, their profound mastery of natural resources, etched an indelible mark on shipbuilding practices that echoed long after their dragon-headed prows ceased to dominate the northern seas. Imagine, if you will, the shipbuilders who came after, perhaps generations later, standing on the same windswept shores. They might not have been rendering blubber over bubbling cauldrons, but the fundamental problem remained. How do you keep the unforgiving sea from claiming your wooden vessel? The Vikings had, through necessity and keen observation, established a foundational principle. Wood, when exposed to water, degrades. It swells, it shrinks, it rots, it becomes a soggy, splintered mess. And to combat this, you needed a protective barrier, something that could repel water, yes, but also nourish the wood itself, keeping it supple and resilient. This wasn't just about a quick fix. It was about the long-term health of the ship, like giving your wooden furniture a good conditioning treatment, only on a much, much larger and more life-critical scale. You wouldn't want your favorite armchair to spring a leak, now would you? The direct lineage of animal fat application might have faded as other materials became more readily available or economically viable. For instance, the widespread adoption of pine tar and pitch became the dominant method for waterproofing and preserving ships for centuries across Europe. This shift wasn't a rejection of the idea of a protective coating, but rather an evolution of the material. Pine tar, derived from the distillation of pine wood, offered a more consistent, more easily scalable, and perhaps less perishable alternative to animal fats. It also had excellent preservative qualities, forming a black, sticky, and highly water-repellent layer. So, while the Vikings were slathering on what amounted to a very primitive, very effective natural wood conditioner, later mariners were using something akin to a heavy-duty industrial-grade sealant that smelled distinctly of a campfire that got a bit out of hand. But here's where the legacy truly shines. The mindset. The Vikings weren't just slapping fat on planks. They were engaging in what we might call applied material science, without the fancy degrees or lab coats. They understood that the wood needed to breathe, to remain flexible, and to resist the constant assault of salt and moisture. This deep, intuitive understanding of wood as a living material, one that needed care and protection, was passed down. You see it in the careful selection of timbers, the methods of seasoning wood, and, crucially, the ongoing practice of applying protective coatings. It wasn't just about plugging holes. It was about creating a durable, dynamic system. Imagine trying to explain to a Viking that one day, people would spend hours meticulously waxing their metal cars, not just to make them shiny, but to protect the paint from the elements. They'd probably nod sagely and say, "Ah, yes, metal needs its blubber too." The very concept of a comprehensive external waterproofing system for wooden vessels, one that went beyond simple caulking of seams, can be traced back to these early, ingenious solutions. Before the Vikings, many cultures might have used pitch or resin, but the systematic, almost ritualistic application of a widespread protective layer, meticulously worked into the very grain of the wood, was something the Norse perfected. It wasn't just about stopping leaks, but about enhancing the wood's natural resistance, making it more pliable, less prone to cracking, and even deterring marine borers. Historians still argue whether the precise chemical composition of Viking animal fat mixtures offered unique anti-fouling properties beyond mere waterproofing, or if it was simply the physical barrier that made the difference. Some scholars contend that certain animal fats, particularly those from marine mammals, might have contained compounds that naturally deterred barnacles and other unwanted hitchhikers, saving the crew the rather unpleasant job of scraping the hull in icy waters. Even as shipbuilding techniques advanced, incorporating more complex joinery, stronger fastenings, and eventually, the shift from clinker, overlapping planks, to carvel edge-to-edge planks, the fundamental need for external protection remained. The Viking approach underscored the importance of proactive maintenance. It wasn't enough to build a ship. You had to maintain it, constantly nourishing its wooden skin. This principle persisted through the Age of Sail, where ships were regularly hauled out of the water for careening, a process where they were tipped on their sides to scrape off growth and reapply protective coatings. While the substance might have changed from rendered seal fat to pine tar, then to copper sheathing and eventually to modern epoxy paints, the core idea that a ship's outer skin needed continuous, deliberate protection was a direct descendant of that greasy Viking innovation. You could almost say the Vikings invented the ship spa day, long before anyone knew what a spa was. They just didn't have cucumber slices for the eyes, unless you count a particularly plump piece of mackerel. This enduring legacy also highlights the Viking approach to resourcefulness. They didn't have vast forests of pine for tar production in every corner of their expanding world, but they did have animals. Lots of them. From whales and seals hunted from the frigid waters to the livestock they kept on land. Every part of the animal was utilized, and the fat, once a mere byproduct, became a strategic naval asset. This knack for seeing value in what others might discard, for repurposing and innovating with what's immediately at hand, is perhaps the most profound part of their legacy. It's a lesson in practical sustainability, long before anyone coined the term. They weren't just clever. They were incredibly efficient, almost to a fault. Imagine a Viking trying to understand why we throw away perfectly good avocado pits today. They'd probably figure out how to make a ship sealant out of them, or at least a surprisingly sturdy comb. So, as you picture the evolution of shipbuilding, don't just see the grand galleons and formidable warships of later eras. See, too, the ghost of a Viking longship, its planks glistening with a protective sheen of rendered fat. That seemingly simple, almost crude method was a foundational step in understanding marine preservation. It taught generations of shipbuilders that a vessel isn't just a collection of planks and nails. It's a dynamic structure that needs constant care, protection, and a deep understanding of its materials. The lessons learned from those early, greasy waterproofing efforts laid the groundwork for complex naval architecture, influencing everything from the design of watertight compartments to the development of anti-corrosive paints for modern steel hulls. It was a pioneering step in keeping the sea out, one scoop of animal fat at a time, proving that sometimes the most sophisticated solutions begin with the most humble ingredients. It's easy to get lost in the romance of the Viking Age, all the epic voyages and the clashing of shields. But if you peel back the layers of legend, what you really find at the core of their astonishing achievements is something far more grounded, far more practical. It's the kind of practicality that makes you think, they really just figured stuff out, didn't they? As you settle deeper into your cozy spot, let's marvel at the sheer, unadulterated resourcefulness and practical genius that define the Viking approach to surviving and, more importantly, thriving at sea. Imagine, for a moment, the world they inhabited. No GPS, no weather satellites, not even a decent cup of coffee to kickstart the day. Just raw nature demanding immediate and ingenious solutions. You see, the Vikings weren't just warriors. They were problem solvers of the highest order. They didn't have fancy scientific laboratories or university grants for research and development. Their lab was the unforgiving North Sea, and their research was a lifetime of trial and error, observed with an almost breathtaking acuity. Consider the very problem of water in a wooden boat, a constant, insidious enemy. You've seen how they moved from simple pitch, which was about as effective as trying to waterproof a sieve with a sticky note, to the revelation of animal fats. This wasn't a discovery born from theoretical physics. It was born from someone, somewhere, noticing that a greasy hide shed water, or that a well-fed animal's skin seemed impervious to the elements. You can almost hear them mumble, scratching their beard. What if we put that on the boat? It's the kind of pragmatic leap that separates the merely clever from the truly ingenious. It's like discovering that your cat's fur is surprisingly water repellent and then deciding to make a rain jacket out of it. Please don't try that at home. Your cat would be furious. This wasn't an isolated stroke of luck. It was a mindset. Their ship design, for instance, was a masterclass in practical engineering. You look at a Viking longship and you see not just a vessel but a philosophy. They crafted ships with incredibly shallow drafts, which meant they could not only conquer the vast, unpredictable oceans but also glide effortlessly up shallow rivers, deep into enemy territory. It's the ancient equivalent of having an SUV that can also transform into a submarine. Highly specialized, yet incredibly versatile. This mainstream historical fact, the adaptability of their longships, underscores their genius for creating tools perfectly suited to their environment and goals. They weren't just building boats. They were building extensions of their will, designed for maximum efficiency in a world that didn't tolerate inefficiency. Their resourcefulness extended far beyond shipbuilding. When you're sailing for weeks into the unknown, you can't exactly pop into a convenience store for a snack or check your phone for the time. They had to be entirely self-sufficient, and their solutions were often surprisingly sophisticated. Take, for example, their navigation. While the sun and stars were their primary guides, historians still debate whether their understanding of oceanic currents was based on pure observation or if they had a more intuitive, almost feel, for the water that went beyond simple charting. But here's a quirky tidbit. On cloudy days, when the sun was hidden, there's evidence they might have used something called a sunstone, likely a piece of Iceland spar. This crystal, when held up to the sky, would polarize light and reveal the hidden position of the sun, allowing them to maintain their course. Imagine you're lost at sea, fog so thick you can't see your hand in front of your face, and you pull out a magic rock that points to the sun. It's like having an ancient, low-tech GPS that runs on pure geology. Pretty cool, right? It makes you wonder if they ever lost one overboard and had to just shrug and say, well, guess we're heading to Greenland then. Again. This practical genius was woven into the very fabric of their society. It wasn't just a few clever shipwrights. It was a communal understanding that survival depended on clever adaptation. They lived in a world where waste was not an option. Every part of an animal, every piece of wood, every natural resource was considered for its potential utility. The fat wasn't just for eating. It was for lamps, for cooking, and crucially, for their ships. This holistic approach to resource management meant they were incredibly efficient, getting the absolute maximum out of everything they had. It's the kind of thinking that makes you look at your own overflowing recycling bin and think, what would a Viking do with all this? Probably make a very sturdy, if slightly odd, shield out of your old pizza boxes. Their approach to life was less about abstract theory and more about what works. If it works, you do it. If it works better, you do that instead. This iterative process of refinement, born from necessity, led to incredibly robust and effective solutions. They weren't just surviving. They were innovating in real time under immense pressure. The very act of greasing a ship with animal fat, simple as it sounds, was a testament to this profound understanding of their materials and environment. It wasn't just about applying a coating. It was about understanding the wood, understanding the water, and understanding the properties of the fat itself. It was a humble technology, yes, but one that unlocked an entire era of exploration and expansion. And as you drift further into the quiet of the night, you can appreciate that this practicality wasn't just about survival. It was about ambition. It was about pushing boundaries, about seeing what lay beyond the horizon. Without the practical solutions to keep their ships afloat and seaworthy, without the ingenuity to navigate vast, uncharted waters, their epic sagas would have remained just dreams. The sleek lines of their longships, the waterproofing that kept the biting North Sea at bay, the food preserved for long journeys, the tools crafted for every task, each element speaks volumes about a people who truly understood how to make their world work for them. They didn't wait for technology. They created it, often with nothing more than keen observation, persistent effort, and a healthy dose of, let's just try this and see what happens. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the simplest, most practical solutions are the ones that lead to the most extraordinary achievements. This pragmatic brilliance, born from harsh necessity and keen observation, is their enduring legacy. It's not just the tales of their raids or the echoes of their sagas that resonate through history, but the quiet hum of their resourcefulness, the steady beat of their practical genius. It's a genius that reminds us that true innovation often comes from looking at what you have, understanding what you need, and finding the most direct, effective way to bridge that gap. They didn't conquer the seas with magic or divine intervention. They did it with grease, wood, and an incredible amount of grit and ingenuity. And that, my friend, is a story worth remembering. Now, as the last echoes of their voyages fade into the stillness, feel the gentle pull of sleep. The ancient waves, once challenging and vast, now lull you with their rhythmic whispers. Let the image of those resourceful minds, those practical hands, quietly settle into your thoughts. There's a comfort in knowing that even in the face of immense challenges, human ingenuity, born from necessity and a deep connection to the natural world, always finds a way. The Vikings, with their ships whispering through the water, greased by the very life of the land, understood this deeply. You are safe now, cradled by the quiet of the night, far from the spray and the cold. Let your mind drift, softened by the stories of the past, as you journey into the peaceful depths of slumber. All is calm, all is quiet,